I'm Kaylee, and this is how I remember what I read. So this whole thing started with a comment from Keen Cat Chris, who is one of my very favorite people here on BookTube. And she commented on my monthly wrap-up video where I'm giving reviews of all the books that I had read that month. And she asked, how do you remember what the books are about by the end of the month? And that one question sent me on a rabbit trail, just kind of figuring out and discovering, how do people really remember what they read? And how do I remember what I read? Because I guess I never really thought about it before. So we're gonna dive in today and kind of go on a little journey of discovery. How does my memory work? Why is it that I can remember what I read, but I can't remember other important facts about my actual life? I can't remember my second cousin's name, but I can remember all the characters from Pride and Prejudice. Memory is a weird thing. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like and click on the little notification bell and follow me over on Goodreads and Storygraph and all the places. So first of all, when King Cat Chris asked me, how do you remember what the books were about when you're filming your wrap-up video at the end of the month? So first I just responded with kind of the more practical response. I film with my Goodreads read list right in front of me so I can glance at my review for each book and see the star rating as I film. So sometimes I do glance at Goodreads to be like, okay, yeah, I gotta remember to mention this particular aspect of whatever book. But mostly, I just remember what the book was about. So I said in my comment, once you've read it and thought about it and written a lengthy review and copy and pasted the review all over social media and maybe emailed the review to a publisher if it was an ARC and talked about the book again at book club, and then it tends to stick in your memory after all of that. And King Cat Chris responded, I don't remember, even after writing reviews and talking about it, by the end of the month, I forget. And I started wondering, is that a common experience for people to forget what they read just within a few weeks? I mean, certainly within months and years, I've probably forgotten quite a lot of what I've read. But it can be a real struggle, kind of this struggle with our memory, trying to remember everything that we wish that we could remember. But I think we also need to remember that it's not normal to remember everything. We aren't supposed to remember every little detail of everything. And that is part of what makes rereading books so delightful. You might remember the major plot points or the names of 2 or 3 of the main characters, but rediscovering the details is what makes rereading one of the great pleasures of life. And you can't do that unless you've forgotten at least a little. It seems like I've been seeing a lot of this topic lately, talking about trying to remember what you read, and a lot of accusations of book talkers who just read a bunch of stuff and then they've just forgotten it by the next week. But I think we have to ask the question, is that a bad thing? Just because you don't remember the book that you read, does that invalidate the experience that you had reading it? Is it somehow bad or undesirable to not remember what you read? Is that really so horrible? I don't know. I mean, it depends on the effort that you put in trying to remember it, I guess, and whether or not it's particularly important to you. But I don't know that we can really put a moral judgment on it and be like, it's bad if you read a book and you didn't remember it, and it's good if you did remember it. There are some books that I've read that I wish I could forget, okay? Because they were not good. And of course, this reminds me of that famous quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, I cannot remember the books I've read any more than the meals I have eaten. Even so, they have made me. I think that's definitely true in my own life. I mean, before Goodreads came along and before I started actually keeping track of all my reading, there are tons and tons of books that I read as a kid, as a teenager, and I don't remember them all. And there are books where I remember a little bit of the plot, kind of hazy, but I have no idea what the title was or who the author was. It's just kind of lost in the sands of time. But those books made me the person that I am. But let's assume that you want to remember what you read. It's important to you to have a good memory and be able to remember the things that you've read for at least a few weeks or months after you read it. So to explore this topic, I kind of went down the rabbit hole in YouTube and found a bunch of other videos all on this topic of remembering what you read. And that got me thinking about different aspects of my own memory and my habits that I kind of just have developed over time of reading so much, and I don't even realize that I'm doing it. But then I just started analyzing, what is it that I do that makes me remember? So one thing I think that we have to take into consideration right away are just general distractions. Life is distracting. You don't always have the leisure to just sit down and focus on your book. There are a lot of things that distract you, and there is stress that is going to affect your memory. If you're under a lot of stress, you're not going to be able to remember anything. And your hormones are going to play a big part in that, whether or not you're sleeping well, even like your digestion, and whether or not you're eating healthfully. All those things are going to influence your memory and your capacity to focus. So right away, just give yourself some grace. You're only human and your brain is not meant to remember everything. And there are a lot of life circumstances that could steal your focus. So, just be patient with yourself and forgive yourself and give yourself a little grace. One thing that really helps me to remember stuff, which is nothing that I do, it's just how my brain works. I'm a visual learner. So right away, I already kind of have a leg up on being able to remember the things that I see. When I was a kid, I was homeschooled and we used the Abeka curriculum, which is very focused on reading comprehension and memory. And so again, I developed these habits of remembering what I was reading, and not just that, but analyzing and comprehending and understanding deeper themes in what I was reading from a very, very young age. So the fact that I'm a visual learner coupled with an education that was focused on reading comprehension, I kind of already have these tools in my toolbox to help me remember what I read. Not to say that you can't remember what you read if you're not a visual learner. If you're an auditory learner, then you could certainly listen to audiobooks or read aloud to yourself as you read. If you're a kinetic learner, just make sure that you've got that paper in your hands. Maybe instead of reading on an e-reader, make sure you're reading physical books so you have something to kind of tangible, Another great way for kinetic learners to connect with what they're reading is through writing and annotating. See, then you're doing something with your hands that is causing that memory to kick in. So there are just lots of little tricks that you can use to use the superpower of your learning style with whatever that you're trying to remember or learn. Okay, that was my little teacher moment. I have a degree in education, so, learning style is kind of my thing. Probably the biggest thing, though, that's going to help you remember anything that you want to remember is to create an emotional connection with it. Our brains are hardwired to remember emotional things. If you're overwhelmed with emotion, your brain knows to store that away in the long-term memory. So if you're reading a book and you're just not connecting with it emotionally, it's just kind of fizzling out, then of course you're not going to remember. Maybe it's better off just to forget that part anyway. But the things that become really important to you, the stories or the nonfiction that becomes really important to you, are those that have an emotional impact on you. So of course you're going to remember those much more easily. One way that I kind of unknowingly foster an emotional connection with whatever I'm reading is through visualizing what's happening. It becomes like a movie that's playing in your head. And also, kind of back to the learning styles, if you're visualizing what's happening and imagining it very vividly, you're really getting all that information in a lot of different ways. So it's kind of a visual story in your mind's eye, an auditory in your imagination as you imagine the characters saying their different dialogue. It can even be kinetic through your imagination. There have been times when I'm reading a fight scene and my muscles are literally moving with whatever sword strikes or things that the characters are doing. So I'm feeling the scene in my own body. However, if you are visualizing the story as a movie in your head, people have different levels of being able to visualize things in their imagination. Mine is insanely vivid and detailed. I will just completely lose myself in that inner world of imagination. But recent studies show that some people just kind of imagine things sort of in 2D and not very detailed. But some people imagine things, in full 3D and extremely detailed, and all the colors and the scents and the sounds and everything really come to life in your mind's eye. When you get immersed like that, your brain chemistry actually reflects whatever that you're reading. So if you're reading a romance novel, your brain chemistry and your hormones will start to reflect those of a person in love. If you're reading horror or action adventure or thriller or something, those fear hormones start to race around in your brain and your body thinks that you are in, a life-threatening situation. There actually is like this transfer of emotion where you feel the emotions of whatever character if you are really invested into the story. And it's that emotional connection that triggers in your brain, this is something that needs to be remembered. This is an emotional memory that needs to go into the long-term memory. Something else that I do just naturally that helps me to remember is whenever I'm reading, it's not just about kind of the surface level plot and the characters, but I'm always looking for these deeper connections and concepts and ideas that are being explored. I'm kind of watching to identify themes and deeper meanings behind the plot, behind the characters' words. Now, some books are better at this than others, of course, but most of the time, there is some kind of deeper meaning that the author is trying to get across through the story. Some authors are better at bringing that forward than others, and some storytelling styles lend themselves to that better than others, but there's always something to be looking for. And since I am taking the time to think through the themes and analyze different concepts and ideas that are being explored, then it takes some more time to kind of digest and think through everything that you've read. You have to give it time to go into your long-term memory and put in some effort to remember and analyze what you've read. And through that analysis, you can kind of compare and contrast different authors or different books within the same genre and kind of see, they use this plot device, but then in this other book, this other author used the same plot device, but in a different way with a different outcome. And so you're connecting a book that you've already read before and kind of connecting those ideas to this book that you're reading now. And that just solidifies that memory for both of those books. Even better is if you can connect some of those ideas and concepts to some actual truth in your real life. Sometimes thinking through all those things can take a bit of brain power. And I'm not gonna lie, there are some classics that just end up being a little bit exhausting that way. But it is so worth the effort because then you get all of that deeper meaning and that personal enjoyment that just means so much more. So even after I've read the book, I usually take a day or so to just think about what I want to write for my review. And then I write a detailed and hopefully thoughtful and insightful review with character analysis and plot points and themes, etc. I've done a whole nother video all about what I look for in a book when I'm planning to write my review. So I will link that up above and down in the description so that you can kind of see what are some things to look for as you're analyzing the book. And because I've been thinking about it for a few days and already thinking about my review as I'm reading the book, and then take a day or two to think about it after I've read the book, and then sit down and actually write it all down, that just solidifies my memory even more. Because I've been digesting my experience of the book, and I've been identifying key points that stood out to me. And once my review is posted and written, then I share it all around social media. And then I talk about the book again a few days or weeks later in some sort of video review. And then I also edit the video. So I'm not only filming it, but then I edit it. And so I'm just rehashing this review of this book over and over and over. And then I post the video and respond to comments so that I get quite a lot of prolonged exposure to the information of this book, the concepts and the reactions that I had while reading it. And it's being recalled to my mind for a period of several weeks after I finished reading it. And then I talk about the book again when I go to book club with my friends. So we do a read anything book club where we all just talk about whatever that we've been reading. We don't pick a book and then all read the same book and talk about it. We bring in a stack of books of whatever we've been reading, and we just talk about and tell people everything we've been reading, kind of like a monthly wrap up. So with no notes, no review on Goodreads handy to look at, I have to summarize the plot and give my personal thoughts on whether or not I enjoyed the book in front of 4 highly intelligent, well-educated, voracious readers, 2 of whom actually work at libraries. So I have to really remember what I'm reading. I have to have something semi-intelligent to say in front of my bookish friends. So I think that knowing that I will need to remember makes me remember. There is a reason why I need to remember what I'm reading. And so that inspires me to put in the effort to remember. Every once in a while, not often, I will take notes or put in little sticky tabs and annotate some of what I'm reading. Typically, I would only do that maybe for nonfiction, but sometimes in fiction, if there's something that particularly grabs my attention, I might put a little star, a little asterisk in pencil, never in pen, always in pencil in the margin. Or more likely, I'll probably just put a little sticky note. That way I'm not actually writing in the book. I find that taking notes or annotating or putting little sticky tabs is really great for something that I want to go back and reference particularly later. So if I wanted to remember the exact wording of this quote, then I'll put a little sticky note there or put a little star next to it or something so I can quickly find it again and be able to say, aha, this was the exact wording that was used. So for me, annotating is not so much about like trying to remember something as it is just to mark something for future reference. But a lot of people use annotating quite differently. Tristan and the Classics takes annotating to a whole nother level. He says it's like a conversation with the author, inserting your own thoughts, your own comments and ideas and reactions. And in this way, you're creating a memorable connection with the book. I will leave a link to his video about annotating books in the description. You should definitely check it out. I also watched a video by Python Programmer where he talks about reading to understand. Not just reading to experience the plot and the characters and the things, but really reading to put in the effort to understand the deeper meanings. And I watched a video from Lady of the Library that talks about the effects of stress and diet on your memory, which I thought was really good and encouraging. And she actually had a really interesting tip that you could use the blank space at the end of a chapter to summarize the chapter in just a few sentences. Like if you feel like I am just not understanding what I'm reading, I just can't remember what happened from one plot point to the next, that would be a really great way to give yourself a little summary, and you have to put it in your own words, so you have to really stop and think and understand what happened, what character did what. Or for nonfiction, just kind of identifying some key points and some key things that you want to remember. That is such a great tip. I feel like that would just be so helpful if you were really having trouble with your memory. The Read Well podcast is one of my favorite channels, and they had a video that talked about reviewing over your notes, like take little annotative notes and everything, and then review over them and apply those concepts to your own life. So you're making this connection between your experience in life and whatever was in the book. I feel like that is so crucial to creating this emotional attachment to whatever it is that you want to remember, and maybe applying these deeper meanings or these universal truths to your own life. So not only are you just reading something, but you're also somehow growing and becoming more educated and, becoming a better person, hopefully, through what you read. Park Notes also had a video talking about making reading a habit and building up your reading abilities. So none of this happens overnight. I've been doing this since I was a kid. So of course it's easy for me to remember things because I've built up a habit of it, over the last 35 years. I think probably one of the biggest things that you could do to develop more of a habit of being able to focus and remember what you read is to stay off of social media. That mindless scrolling is a disaster for your memory. Aha! I think finally, at the end of the video, we may have found the real culprit, right? If we're having trouble trouble with our memory. Whose fault is that? All that mindless social media scrolling, that's what. And I'm definitely guilty of that myself, but I've been trying to do a lot better this year of just staying off of social media for the most part and spending my time with something a little more edifying, like reading. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments. Please let me know, do you have trouble remembering what you're reading? Or do you feel like I mostly remember what I read? The major plot points, the major things. There have definitely been times when I picked up a book and went, wait a minute, I already read this 5 years ago. I had completely forgotten that I ever even read it. So let me know if you find that that's a problem for you as well. And what tips would you give to help us improve our memory and enjoy our reading even more? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.